Where Thomas Markle is still rehabilitating, having begged his daughter publicly for a visit or a phone call. What possible excuse could these two have, Meghan in particular?
Daddy, I have a new boyfriend. And I said, that's really nice. And then the next call was like, he's British. And I said, well, that's really nice. And then eventually the third time around it was like, he's a prince.
Thomas Markle, he's due to turn 80 next year, and as we know, he's not been a well man recently, and indeed it was a brush with death just last year that renewed his plea for reconciliation with his daughter Meghan, or Meg, and her husband Prince Harry.
I called, it doesn't work anymore, and there's no address I can write to, so I have no way of contacting my dad.
This, of course, was the letter that she wrote to her dad before her and Prince Harry got married.
Markle's father, Thomas Markle, who's issued an emotional plea to his daughter, saying he doesn't want to die estranged.
Thomas Markle, her dad, who I'm glad to report is re-finding his voice. So have a look at the bombshell trailer, which has just been released.
And the estrangement between Meghan and her father, you could argue, is something quite minor. It involves paparazzi and the media. Two things Meghan Markle is very familiar with.
And I think she's taking advantage of a very weakened man and getting him to say things that you just shouldn't be saying on television.
And Meghan's half-sister as well, with whom she's had this long kind of feud, also fills that gap and speaks. And really, it should be Meghan controlling the narrative on this one.
What if
Thomas
the woman
Markle has given interviews about his estrangement from Meghan for 8 years now. In 2018, 2020, 2021, 2023, and again this past winter. Almost every single one ends the same way: an appeal, a plea, a request for one phone call. This is the full timeline, in his own words, across nearly a decade of on-record interviews. And watching them back-to-back tells a different story than any single headline does.
I guess heartbroken. I'm very upset about it as well, because this is a cruel thing to do to a grandparent.
The break traces to a specific event, days before the May 2018 royal wedding. The Mail on Sunday published photos and surveillance footage appearing to show Thomas staging paparazzi shots of himself, reading a book about Britain, getting measured for a suit. Reports at the time said the images sold for close to $140,000. Thomas suffered what he described as 2 heart attacks in the aftermath and didn't attend the wedding. Doria Ragland, Meghan's mother, walked in alone before King Charles, then Prince of Wales, stepped in to walk Meghan down the aisle.
Watching it was difficult for me because I wasn't there, but at the same time I'm watching my daughter being watched by the entire world. Everybody was watching my daughter. I couldn't have been more proud. Like I said, Charles, how can I ask for a better replacement than Charles? I was thrilled to tears that he was doing that for me. I just wish it had been my hand holding my daughter, not his.
Just weeks after the wedding, Thomas gave his first sit-down to Good Morning Britain. He described watching the ceremony from a bed and breakfast, calling himself, in his own words, a footnote in one of the greatest moments in history. In that same interview, he acknowledged the staged photos had been a mistake, the beginning of a pattern that would repeat for years. Public regret, followed by a request to talk, followed by silence from Meghan's
comments
side.
come after Meghan spoke candidly to Oprah about her fallout with her dad ahead of her I-dos to Harry in May 2018. Their relationship fell apart after Thomas decided to work with the tabloids leading up to their royal wedding.
There's a lot that's been lost already. And I grieve a lot. I mean, I've lost my father. I lost
By December, 6 months on, Thomas was back on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid, describing a complete lack of contact. No reply to a letter, no reply to text messages. When Morgan asked directly whether he'd been ghosted, Thomas's answer was blunt: "Ghosted like you, yes." He went further, directly appealing to Queen Elizabeth for help repairing the relationship. The interview drew heavy public criticism at the time. Some viewers called it manipulative, using the media to pressure his daughter rather than reaching her privately. Piers Morgan pushed back on that criticism publicly, noting Thomas hadn't been paid for the interview and calling the situation a sad one that needed resolving. The most consequential document in this entire story arrives here. According to Meghan's own account, first given to Oprah Winfrey in 2021 and repeated in her Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan, The constant media appearances had become a serious source of tension inside the palace. She said Harry was being constantly berated over his father-in-law's interviews, and that she went to Queen Elizabeth and then Prince Charles for advice. Their suggestion, according to Meghan, was that she write her father a private letter asking him to stop. She said she went to considerable lengths to get that letter to him discreetly. What happened next is the part that actually ended up in court. Thomas gave portions of that letter to the Mail on Sunday, which published extracts alongside commentary from a handwriting expert. Thomas has since defended that decision publicly, saying the letter contained material he considered hateful and cruel, but that he released only a small portion of it, which he's described as the less damaging part, specifically to give his side of the story after Meghan, in his account, had already shared her version with people speaking to the American press. He's also claimed Queen Elizabeth herself never actually read the letter before it went out, calling it something Meghan wrote in anger. That leak became the center of Meghan's privacy lawsuit against the Mail's publisher, Associated Newspapers, a case her legal team argued involved a private, personal letter published without her consent.
Earlier this year, the tabloid newspaper published an article about a handwritten letter that Meghan had sent to her estranged father, Thomas Markle. Harry has
the most damaging beat in this entire timeline, at least for Thomas's own credibility, comes from a Channel 5 documentary that aired in January 2020. In it, Thomas admitted outright that when Harry directly asked him whether he'd posed for the staged wedding photos, he lied, telling Harry it had actually been a hoodie fitting, not a suit. He confirmed on camera that wasn't true. In that same documentary, he acknowledged he was still profiting from the photos, and said the royal family owes him. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because it complicates every plea that came before and after it. By his own admission, this wasn't simply a father who got unlucky with paparazzi. He looked his new son-in-law in the eye, according to his own account, and lied about it directly. By spring 2021, Thomas appeared in an Australian tell-all special alongside his other two children, Samantha Markle and Thomas Markle Jr., both of whom disputed Meghan's public description of her upbringing. Meghan had told Oprah and repeated in the Netflix series that she grew up an only child. Samantha and Thomas Jr. both said on camera that they were present throughout her childhood, with Thomas Jr. responding to the claim by saying, in his words, he simply noted it down as another lie. Samantha used the interview to describe her half-sister's relationship with Harry as toxic, and said she didn't believe Meghan was capable of the empathy or remorse a reconciliation would require. Thomas, for his part, struck a softer tone in the same special, describing his estrangement as a huge, daily disappointment, and laying out exactly what he wanted: to sit down together, ask what was wrong, and ask how to fix it. He said he was open to any kind of conversation, and that he'd never do another interview again if it meant getting his daughter
Markle, or her sister Samantha Markle, or her father Thomas Markle Sr. for something like 6-7 years. I haven't spoken to them at all. They've been completely cut off.
By September 2023, 16 months after a stroke had quieted his previously constant media appearances, Thomas returned to Good Morning Britain for what was billed as possibly his final interview. He was direct about what had changed. He still hadn't seen his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, and said plainly that he thought the king should get to see his grandchildren too. Asked what it would take, he pointed to his own stroke as the moment he expected might have moved his daughter to reach out. It hadn't. Newsweek's royal correspondent Jack Royston, covering the interview, wrote bluntly that the plea was likely to fall on deaf ears, given the leaked letter, the staged photos, and years of public criticism standing between them. Thomas himself pushed back on the idea this was really his last word, telling the network the interview wasn't necessarily his final one.
About time, Meghan Markle has finally reached out to her father, Thomas Markle, who is fighting for his life in an intensive care unit in a Philippines hospital, having lost a leg via amputation. But we know exactly why Meghan has reached out, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with her concerns for the well-being of Thomas Markle, who she has neglected since 2018.
He was right that it wouldn't be the last chapter. Reporting from this past winter covers a serious escalation. Thomas underwent a leg amputation following complications during hospitalization in the Philippines, where he'd relocated with Thomas Jr. acting as his caregiver. During that hospitalization, a spokesperson for Meghan confirmed to Fox News Digital that she had sent her father a letter, adding that a tabloid reporter's continuous presence at his bedside had made reaching him privately exceedingly difficult, though the letter, they said, eventually reached him safely through trusted contacts. Line them up end to end: 2018, 2018 again, 2020, 2021, 2023, 2025, and the pattern is impossible to miss: a public plea, a wave of sympathy or criticism depending on who's watching, no visible reply, and then silence until the next interview. Whatever you think of how Thomas has handled his side of this, and by his own admission, that includes at least one direct lie to Harry's face, 8 years of consistent, on-record appeals for one phone call is, at minimum, a genuinely sad through line in a story that gets treated as tabloid noise far more often than it gets treated as what it actually is, a family that has now spent the better part of a decade not speaking.